good morning and welcome to everybody to this webinar on notification of studies and pre-submission advice. My name is Stefano Cappè, and together with the two EFSA colleagues, Sorina and Remigio, we will show the new portal Connect EFSA, implemented for supporting the pre-submission activities related to new transparency regulation that will become effective as of next 27 of March. In this context, we will look to the processes and web forms that you will use to notify studies, list of intended studies for renewal, and request pre-submission advice or renewal pre-submission advice. By the end of this webinar, you should become familiar with the new system and be comfortable to perform all these pre-submission activities. To achieve this objective, we have conceived this session as a mixture of presentation that will be also complemented with the practical demonstration of the system in the form of short videos. For the presentation and video editing, I wish to thank the colleagues that supported us in the preparation of all the material for this webinar. Of course, all the material will be published on the EFSA website, and we are confident that the individual videos will be very useful for you to be used as a reference guide on your day-by-day usage of the system. The full webinar is also recorded and will be published on the EFSA website. Regarding the interaction in this webinar, you are connected by a one-way audio that will allow you to only to listen. If you want to ask questions, you have to do it by using the chat, and I already saw that many of you asked questions. You should be aware that questions on practical arrangements will not be covered by this webinar. EFSA is preparing a frequently asked document that will conclude the feedback cycle on the practical arrangement and will include the question received during the entire engagement cycle. EFSA is aiming to publish this document before the entry into force of transparency regulation. Of course, we are aiming to answer the technical question on the Connect EFSA in the last part of this webinar, in the question and answer session. We can already envisage that due to the high number of participants, it will be difficult to answer all the questions. But we will reuse your question to prepare a specific case study for the next webinar session, and we will aim to also reply to your questions. For this reason, please, I already saw that some of you already posted questions with anonymous user. I really ask you to include a reference so that we can use it for in order to reply to you at a later stage. In order to facilitate the clustering of the answer, I ask you kindly if you could submit your question together or immediately after the specific agenda items. Let's have a look to the agenda items. So beside this brief introduction I provided to you, we will have session on the registration, on the pre-application ID that will also provide a high-level introduction on the different processes. And then we will go more in depth of the different processes: notification of studies, general pre-submission advice, notification of the list of intended studies for renewal. These last three sessions are complemented with a video demo. Then we will have the question and answer session. So I pass immediately the word to my colleague Sorina for the registration topic.
Thank you, Stefano. So the next slides will walk you through the registration process. But let me introduce to you the actors of this webinar. Sarah is representing business operators and potential applicants. John is representing laboratories and testing facilities, And Martin is representing third parties working on behalf of business operators and laboratories. And the public will be involved in public consultations and at a later stage, if they are interested, can be involved in let's say, seeing the information we are discussing in this webinar once the studies are published. In order to initiate a pre-submission activity, a potential applicant or a laboratory or testing facility to which a study has been commissioned shall first register in the system. Third parties authorized to represent one or more entities referred to in paragraph 1 shall also register in the authority system supporting pre-submission activities. Registered entities shall ensure that all information provided are reported accurately and kept up to date. You might probably recognize some extracts from the practical arrangements on pre-submission phase and public consultation. The practical arrangements can be consulted clicking on the link on this slide or can be found on EFSA website. Everything starts from the Connect EFSA portal. The link to reach the Connect EFSA portal can be seen in the lower left part of this slide. The same information was communicated to the participants of this webinar in a previous email. We encourage you to register your organization right after this webinar to allow EFSA to perform the validation of the many requests in time for the opening of the notification of studies database. Until now, only 10% of our estimation, 10% of operators has been registered. Now, let's click on Login and Register button. The registration steps are the same for Sarah, John, and Martin. There are certain fields that will differentiate their organization. After clicking Login Register button, they will be presented the login form. Since they are not registered yet, they will have to click on Not a Member button, and they will be redirected to the registration form. Now, let's see what Sarah has to do. She will first fill in the contact details. This contact is the main contact of the organization. It's the administrative one. She will provide personal information, first name, last name, email address, and she will select the affiliation. Sarah has two possibilities to select in the affiliation field: industry or multinational, or industry, small or medium-sized enterprise, depending on the type of her organization. The affiliation field is not relevant for the notification of study. It's connected to the contact details. Then she will proceed filling in the account details linked to the organization. She must be very careful when selecting the values in the category and subcategory fields, because this combination will determine the type of operation she will be able to perform in the tool. In the category field, Sarah will select business operators. In the subcategory field, Sarah will select applicants. The field small medium enterprise is relevant only for business operators and applicants. Before selecting yes in this field, Sarah needs to verify whether her organization qualifies as a small or medium-sized enterprise as defined in the recommendation 2003-361-EC. This verification shall be done performing the SME self-assessment questionnaire that can be found in the European Commission website. The same questionnaire can be reached using the link in this presentation. After reading the condition of use of the data she provided and checking the boxes, Sarah can click the Submit button. If the registration was successful, she will receive on the display information about the email she will receive with instructions for resetting her password. Important notice: the reset password email will be triggered upon EFSA validation of the registration request. Now, let's see what John has to do. Also, John will fill in the contact details, providing the personal information. In the affiliation field, John will select science or academia. Then he will proceed with the account details related to the organization. Also, in this case, category and subcategory fields are very important. In the category field, he will select laboratories or testing facilities. And in the subcategory field, he has three choices: academia, clinical research organization, or laboratories. He will pick up the value that best characterizes his laboratory, his organization. Let's suppose that he will pick up laboratories. Then he will proceed filling in the other fields. As we said, small and medium enterprise field is not relevant for laboratories. John will have to select now in this field, the value now. After checking the conditions of use of the data provided, he click on the submit button and he will receive the same information on the display as Sarah received before. Also, in his case, the reset password email will be triggered upon EFSA validation of the registration request. Finally, we have Martin. Martin will fill in the contact details, providing personal information, and in the affiliation field, he will select consultant. Now, Martin has to fill in the account details related to the organization. He must be very careful at the values selected in category and subcategory field, because these values will drive the operation he will be able to perform in the tool. In the category field, if Mark's organization will work on behalf of a business operator, he will have to select business operator's value. If his organization will be a third party working on behalf of laboratories and testing facilities, he will have to select laboratories and testing facilities. Let's go for the first option. In the subcategory field, Martin will have to select notifiers acting on behalf of the applicants, since he selected business operators in category. If in category Mark selected laboratories or testing facilities, in the subcategory field, he should select notifiers acting on behalf of laboratories or testing facilities. Then he will proceed filling in the other fields. Also, in this case, small, medium enterprise field is not relevant for third parties, so he will select the value now. After checking the conditions of use, he will click Submit button. And if the registration was successful, he will receive the same information as Sarah and John. Also, in his case, the reset password email will be triggered upon EFSA validation of the registration. As we saw in the previous slides, Sarah, John, and Martin registered the account of their organization and administrative contacts, but they might have the need to add additional contacts to their organization. So they will fill in with the credentials just obtained the login form and click Login. Once connected, they will go to the My Details section. In the My Details section, they can find two tabs. In the tab Details, they can see all the information provided at the registration step on their organization. In the Related tab, they can see the list of contacts registered for the organization. To add a new contact, they have to click on the dedicated button and the new contact form will be displayed. After providing the information, they click Next and the new contact will receive a reset password email triggered upon EFSA validation of the registration request. Finally, can happen Sarah or John or Martin forgets the password. They can reset their password from the login page. They click on Forget Your Password link and the password reset window will be displayed. They will have to provide the email address declared at the registration moment. After clicking Reset Password, they will receive an email associated to their account with the instruction on resetting the password. For further details on how these processes are implemented in the tool, I encourage you to watch the video tutorial on registration of an account. This can be reached from this slide using this link or can be found on EFSA YouTube channel. Now, I pass the floor to my colleague Stefano to introduce to you the pre-application identification.
Thank you very much, Sorina. I hope that you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, I'm live. In my section on, I will introduce a new concept inserted in the practical arrangement, the concept of pre-application ID. We will see that the pre-application ID is common to all the pre-submission processes, and it is essential for their implementation and fundamental for the reuse of the pre-submission data in the following step. For example, the application validation and dissemination. So we are talking about the measure introduced in the Article 32 of Transparency Regulation. We have the General Pre-Submission Advice, Article 32A. Then we have the notification of studies with Article 32B. And finally, we have the notification of intended studies for renewal, the public consultation, and the EFSA advice. Now, we need to, let's say, link these measures with how this measure has been implemented in the tool we are presenting here. So this is basically the main entry page of the portal. You can see that the system presents two different sessions, given the different sensitivity of information. One is for new application or application modification, is the same section here. And one is instead for renewal. In the section New Application, you can perform notification of studies according to Article 32B, but also ask general pre-submission advice for the same, let's say, potential application. Instead, in the renewal section, you can submit the list of intended studies for renewal according to Article 32C1 and perform the public consultation and obtain the renewal of pre-submission advice. Ask general pre-submission advice, because it's also applicable for the renewal, and notify studies according to Article 32B, which is also necessary for this renewal application. You can already see that the general pre-submission advice and notification of studies can be requested in both sessions. And this is very important. While, for example, the list of intended studies for renewal and the renewal pre-submission advice can be only requested in the section renewals. Let's now see a little bit more in detail how the process has been implemented in the system. We will clarify a lot, I mean, how the pre-application ID will work. So the first process that we will see is the general pre-submission advice. The potential applicant, as a first action, has to request the pre-application ID. We will see later on what it is. Then they can ask a number of questions. And after a while, they will receive the advice of EFSA. Later on, EFSA, when we will, after the validation application, EFSA will publish the summary of the pre-submission advice after the application is declared valid and admissible. For the notification of studies for a new application, the process still starts with the request of a pre-application ID. This is if it was not already requested to ask a pre-submission advice. Then, after this pre-application ID is obtained, in this case, both Sarah and John, so the business operator and laboratory, can start to notify studies. As a second step, we have the submission of the application. EFSA, in this step, EFSA performed the validation of the application using the notified studies that are stored in the database of study notification. And finally, this information is also used when EFSA publishes the study notification with the related studies after the confidentiality decision-making process has completed. The last part is about the application renewal. Again, here, Sarah will need to request a pre-application ID for renewal, and then the potential applicant needs to submit the list of intended studies and the study design according to Article 32C1. Then, basically, there will be the public consultation and the renewal pre-submission advice. And after EFSA, and then EFSA will provide advice. As last step, when this process is completed, the potential applicant, Sarah, will still need to notify the studies according to Article 32B. We will see more in detail in the next session of the webinar, the detail of these different processes. This is just to give you a general, let's say, overview and let's say introduce how important is the pre-application ID. So what is the purpose of the pre-application ID? The purpose of pre-application ID is mainly to group the notified studies. And we normally try to, let's say, present it as a folder. So it should remind you of the old concept of the paper folder you were using to file your studies maybe in the past. So let's see also how the pre-application ID is helpful then in the dossier validation. So Sarah, when she will submit the dossier, will report the pre-application ID. EFSA, through the pre-application ID, will find out the relevant notification in the notification of study database. There are two types of pre-application IDs. There is the pre-application ID for the new and modification application, and then there is a specific pre-application ID for renewals. But what is the pre-application ID? The pre-application ID basically identify with a code, with a number, a specific concept. So the subject of the application, the intended area, and the business operator, let's say, involved in this application process. So there can be even more than one business operator in link to the pre-application ID. The pre-application ID for renewal is very similar to the pre-application ID. Actually, it's actually the same, but include few additional features. So you can identify a reference member state. You can specify the former application ID, and most important, it is possible to specify the list of intended studies for renewal. So remember that in the practical arrangement, it is required that prior of initiating any pre-submission activity, potential applicant shall request the pre-application identification. So it's a mandatory step of the notification of studies and pre-submission advice. And it is necessary to link all the information for a specific regulated product in a given regulated product area. So this is very important to remember. And we put also the link to the practical arrangement. Okay, I thank you for this presentation, and I pass the word to my colleague Sorina for the notification of studies.
Thank you very much, Stefano. The next slide will give you an overview of the notification of studies processes. Let's have a look at some extracts from the Transparency Regulation related to Article 32b. The authority shall establish and manage a database of studies commissioned or carried out by business operators to support an application. For the purposes of paragraph 1, business operators shall, without delay, notify the authority. For the purposes of paragraph 1, laboratories and other testing facilities located in the Union shall also, without delay, notify the authority. This obligation is also extended to laboratories and other testing facilities located in third countries having an agreement with the Union. The obligation to notify, as we see, applies to both business operators and laboratories. To avoid the double notification of a study, the Notification of Studies database has implemented a process of notification, co-notification, that we will see together in the next slides. Sarah is notifying studies for a business operator. Sarah is preparing for the notification. Is this notification the first study for a new application? In this case, if yes, Sarah first needs to request a pre-application ID before starting the notification. Otherwise, she has to retrieve a pre-application ID to which the new notification will be linked. Sarah opens the pre-application ID folder and creates the notification. The notification can be created in the status draft. Once Sarah fills in all the mandatory fields, she can click on the Notify button. Shall the study be performed by an internal facility? If yes, the process ends. Otherwise, an alert email will be sent to the laboratory in charge with the execution of the study. John is notifying studies for the laboratory in charge with the execution of the study. John will receive the alert email and he will be aware that a new notification is waiting for his co-notification. If the laboratories for which John is working is not registered in the system, he will first need to register it. Otherwise, using his credentials, John will log in the system and will have the possibility to check the notification. And if everything is fine, he can click on the co-notify button and it's done. If he notices some discrepancy in the notification, John cannot modify the notification, but he will have the possibility to co-notify with remarks, writing his findings in the dedicated field, and the process ends. But may happen that John's laboratories has no obligation to co-notify, or maybe John doesn't see the alert email. In case of no co-notification, after 30 days, John will receive a reminder. If he doesn't co-notify the study will remain in the notified status and it will be valid for the future submission of the application. There must be situations in which a notification needs a modification. The business operator can modify only notification created by its contacts. So Sarah will search the notification in the list of the notifications of studies. She will find the notification. She can apply the changes and save them. The status of the notification will remain the same as before applying the changes. The operation will be saved automatically in the history, and John will be informed by email that a modification was performed on the notification. No further action is expected from John's side. The business operator can also have the possibility to withdraw a notification. Also, withdrawing a notification can be done with the studies that are owned, with the notification that are owned, that were created by the contacts of the business operator. So Sarah will search in the system the notification. When she finds the notification, she can click on the withdraw notification button, providing also, if she wants, a justification for this notification, just as a reminder. The justification will be required at the application stage, when the application will be submitted. A notification can be withdrawn before the completion date of the study. The notification will be marked as withdrawn, and the operation will be automatically saved in the history. John will be informed by email that the notification has been withdrawn. As we know, also the laboratories have the possibility to start a notification. John will create a new study notification. John has no possibility to request a pre-application ID. Only business operators can request pre-application IDs. John creates the notification in the study draft. When he fills in all the mandatory fields, he can click on the notify button, and an alert will be triggered. An email information will be sent to the business operator that commissioned the study. Sarah is working for this business operator. She will receive the alert email, and she will be aware that a new notification created by the laboratory is waiting for her co-notification. If the organization for which Sarah is working is not registered in the system, she has first to register it. Otherwise, she will provide her credentials and she will log in the system. She will be able to check the notification. If everything is fine, she can click on the co-notify button, and that's it. If she notices some discrepancy, she cannot modify the notification, but she can write remarks in the dedicated field and co-notify with remarks. In case Sarah hasn't seen the alert email on the co-notification, she will receive a reminder after 30 days. If she doesn't co-notify the study will remain in the status notified, and it will be visible in the pool of studies associated with this business operator. And the process ends. A notification created by a laboratory can only be modified by the contacts of this laboratory. So John will search the notification. When he finds it, he can apply the changes and save the notification. The notification will remain in the same status as before the changes were applied, and in the history will be automatically saved the action performed. Sarah will be informed by email that a change has been applied to the notification, but no further action is expected from her. Also, the laboratory can withdraw a notification, but must be a notification created by the laboratory. So John will search the notification. When he finds the notification, he can click on the withdraw notification button and provide, as a reminder, a justification for this withdrawal. The notification will be marked as withdrawn, and the action will be saved automatically in the history. Sarah will be informed by email that the notification was withdrawn. Now, let's watch together a short video in which all the processes will be presented in the tool.
This video will cover the notification of studies according to Article 32B of the Transparency Regulation. As a first step, you access the portal of notification of study database, where you will log in as business operator to notify a study. To start the notification process, you enter in section Application and click on the New Application section. Any study notification should be linked to a pre-application ID. The pre-application ID is an identifier grouping all notifications of studies relevant for a specific future application, identified by a subject of the application, in this case the product and the food area. You can consider the pre-application ID as a container or a folder for all the study notifications. Before notifying any studies, you need to request a pre-application ID. Find in the list that pre-application ID to which the notification should be linked. Only after you have obtained the specific pre-application ID, you can proceed with the notification of the study. To create a new pre-application ID, you have to click on the button New Pre-application ID and fill in the form according to the following steps. Provide a request name, which is a search string you can use to retrieve the pre-application ID at later stage. Let's use the example of a fictitious enzyme called monodextroaminotransferase to be used as food additive. As second step, you need to specify the food area by selecting the food domain, the authorization type and the application type. Then, you have to specify the subject of the application, in this case, an enzyme, which is called monodextroaminotransferase. The subject of application is a free text field. Finally, it is possible to include a free text note, which can be useful to include, for example, the internal application ID, or other internal business operator information. Now the pre-application ID is created, and the system shows a detailed form, where you can add some further information. In the pre-application ID you have to add the substance of this food additive. You can retrieve this information at later stage, by using the functionality add component. As this substance is not available in the reference list, you can insert a new substance. Further information on the substance could be also added. You go back to the detail form. It is also possible to share the pre-application ID and related notified studies with additional business operators by using the Share With function. This is particularly helpful when notifications are performed by consortia. Additional business operators cannot modify the pre-application ID and the notified studies. With the Share With function, you can also invite third parties to perform notification activities. In this case, the third parties will be able to see and modify the pre-application ID and the notified studies. The shared information is visible on the right side of the screen. Now let's see how to notify new studies. The system presents an initial form to specify the title and the internal reference number of the study. If the study title is not in English, it is recommended to include the English translation of the title. Following this initial step, the system presents a more detailed form, which you can complete with additional information. For example, you can insert the start date and the planned completion date of the study. In the section Study Scope, you can fill in the study type, the International Standard Certification type and the study objective. You may have noticed that some information was automatically copied from the pre-application ID, such as the test item from the subject of the application and the area. Then you need to fill in the laboratory details. The system offers the possibility to select the laboratory from a drop-down list of pre-registered laboratories. If the laboratory is not in the list, and you want to complete the notification, you can simply indicate some basic information, such as the laboratory name, an email contact, a reference person and the country where the laboratory is located. The laboratory you indicate will receive an invitation to register, which is not binding. Let's try to select an already registered laboratory. This bar highlights the actions you can perform on the study notification. If you click on Notify, the system asks you to confirm the selected laboratory and the email contacts. By default, the system will show you the email address provided at registration. The email address can be changed at this stage. You can also add a short message to be included in the notification email the laboratory will receive. Once the study has been notified, its notification status is shown in the status bar on the top of the screen. In the example, the blue color indicates that the study has been notified. Now let's see the other side of the notification process, how the laboratory can respond to the study notification. When a laboratory logs into the portal, they can only access the section Study. The pre-application identification is not available for laboratories. Entering the section, you can see your studies listed by their status. In the table here, you can go to the tab to co-notify. When you open the tab, you can sort the entries by creation date and, in this case, pick the study on the efficacy of called monodextrin aminotransferase. You can select the study by selecting the link. At this point, you can check the content of the notification performed by the business operator. If the notification corresponds to the study the laboratory has to perform, the laboratory only needs to press the button Co-Notify, thus avoiding any duplication of effort or data. Should there be discrepancies, the laboratory has no possibility of changing the notification, but can click the button Co-Notify with remarks. This will allow him to highlight any issues that have been encountered. It will then be the responsibility of the business operator to respond to any remarks, and modify the notification if necessary. If the study is modified by the business operator at a later stage, the laboratory does not need to co-notify it again, but will receive an alert each time the study is updated. Let's press now the co-notify function. Here you can insert a comment to the business operator. Following the co-notification, the status bar indicates that the study has been successfully notified both from the business operator and the laboratory. The laboratory can notify the study completely independently from the study section by using the New Study tab. By using this feature, the laboratory can also drive the notification process by inserting the notification from scratch and then ask the business operator to co-notify the study. All possibilities are covered. We have seen all the features for the notification of studies according to Article 32b.
Hoping that you have considered useful both the presentation and the demo, I'm passing the floor to my colleague Remigio that will introduce to you the general pre-submission advice.
Thank you, Sorina, and good morning, everybody. Today, I'm going to explain to you two different processes, notably the general pre-submission advice and the renewal pre-submission advice. So let's start with the first one. The general pre-submission advice is foreseen in Article 32A of the General Food Law. The regulation establishes the general pre-submission advice because it's essential that the applications submitted meet the applicable specifications in order to guarantee the best quality of scientific assessment. And that's really citing the wording of the regulation. There's a clear intention to support applicant further during the pre-submission phase to have better applications, to smooth the validity phase, and of course the assessment. The scope of the general pre-submission advice is also defined in the regulation, and it's limited to the rules applicable to and the content required for an application. The design of the studies to be submitted is out of scope unless foreseen in some EFSA's guidance. The general pre-submission advice should relate exclusively to the requirements of an application and cannot go beyond what is mentioned in the guidance documents. This means that in case there are EFSA guidance targeting study design, we can of course explain the content of the guidance, but we cannot provide target advice on specific requests on how to develop a study, hypothesis to be tested, etc. We cannot comment on any proposed design as it remains an applicant's responsibility. The general pre-submission advice is general and in principle applicable to any other applicants who is asking same questions for similar product to be submitted under the same regulated area. Therefore, within this context, the regulation makes very clear that the general pre-submission advice in its spirit specifically targets small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, let's understand how we are going to implement the general pre-submission advice in practice in EFSA. A potential applicant, Sarah, may request general pre-submission advice at any time before submitting the application. In order to do so, first the requester must have the pre-application ID, as previously mentioned by Stefano. After, we are asking to fill in the pre-submission advice form. We thought the form to be simple, easily accessible, because of course it shouldn't be a barrier, as the aim is indeed to support potential applicants, but at the same time to allow us to gather as much information as possible that can be useful to provide the best support. Therefore, in the form, we are asking some background information on the subject of the application, for example, a general description of the substance or products and/or some details about the production process. Furthermore, potential applicants should provide the conditions of use. And finally, the list of questions, which we are suggesting to you to always refer to the related guidance documents or piece of legislation which are not clear. Once the form is ready, then Sarah can submit the request, which is immediately received by EFSA. Upon receipt of the general pre-submission advice form, there will be in EFSA an administrative check, which can last up to 15 working days to understand whether the request falls within the scope as defined in the General Food Law. This means that the request can also be rejected, but in this case, it will not be taken into account in the calculation of the 2 general pre-submission advice foreseen per pre-application ID. EFSA decides on the most appropriate manner to address the questions received, and where possible, the advice is given in written form, while upon an EFSA decision, a telemeeting might be organized if EFSA considers the discussion might be useful to clarify specific aspects of your request. The advice will be provided within 15 working days as of the date of the acceptance, while there will be up to 20 working days in case a telemeeting is organized. In case a telemeeting is organized, then the advice is given during the meeting, and there will be no minutes. In addition to the advice, regardless whether it's provided in written form or during the meeting, EFSA will write a summary of the general pre-submission advice and send it to the requester for information. The summary will be succinct and with limited information because it will not contain any confidential information, and the summary will be published once an application is declared as valid or admissible. Let's understand now which are the main differences that are applicable to plant protection products and maximum residue levels of pesticides. As the rapporteur and evaluating member states are key actors in these workflows, as they are the one carrying out the assessment, they will be involved also in providing general pre-submission advice. Therefore, when Sarah submits the request for general pre-submission advice, she should also select the related competent authority she wishes to submit the envisaged application to. Therefore, in the practical arrangement, we have defined the concepts of the intended rapporteur and evaluating member states for new application and the designated rapporteur member states for applications for renewal. So the general pre-submission advice form will be received also by the competent authority. And EFSA and the national authority will provide advice in close cooperation. Now, we don't have time today to show you the interactions we have foreseen between EFSA and the competent authority, and you will soon find all the details in the EFSA administrative guidance on submission of dossiers and assessment reports for peer review of pesticides, active substances, and on MRL. The involvement of the competent authorities is also foreseen for applications submitted under the GMO Directive 2001/18. It's now important to highlight that the general pre-submission advice is non-committal as to any subsequent EFSA's or member state assessment of application, and is neither binding for the potential applicant. Please also note that the assessment of the qualification of the specific regulated product under a given regulated product area remains a risk manager's responsibility. In case Sarah finally decides to submit the application, once the application is received by EFSA, we will need to implement two provisions. To do so, applicants are asked to include in the application the pre-application IDs previously given. The first provision is indeed the segregation of tasks between the staff who provided general pre-submission advice and the one directly or indirectly involved in any scientific or technical activities on the submitted application. This means that the EFSA staff who worked on the general pre-submission advice cannot work neither on the completeness check, validity check, nor on the assessment. Furthermore, and only once the application is declared as valid or admissible, EFSA will publish the summary of the general pre-submission advice. I've finished with the presentation, and it's now time to watch together the video which shows you how to ask for general pre-submission advice in the Connect EFSA portal.
As a first mandatory step to ask for general pre-submission advice, you need to obtain a pre-application ID. Therefore, we run this demo starting from this web page. On the pre-application ID page, you find a dedicated button to ask for general pre-submission advice. Before doing so, let's verify the key information that EFSA is going to receive: the subject of the application, the food domain, the authorization type, and the application type. When you click on Ask PSA, the acronym for pre-submission advice, the so-called General Pre-Submission Advice form opens, where you need to fill in 3 different fields. Please be clear and concise when adding information that may be useful for the provision of advice. In the first field, you are asked to add relevant background information about the subject of the application, adding for instance details on the substance or product, or the health claim or process that your application refers to. Then, you are asked to provide details on the conditions of use or intended use of your substance. Lastly, there is a field where you can insert all your questions. Please number them and be concise. Please also make clear reference to the relevant sections of the applicable guidance documents and/or legislation. Once you have filled in all necessary information and have reviewed it, you can click on Save. On the top of the page, you can see that the request was successfully created. However, it is important to note that it has not been sent to EFSA yet. In the section called Pre-Submission Advice, you can see the request you have just created. You can click on it to edit, if necessary. With the help of the status bar at the top of the page, you can monitor the status of your request, and indeed, as you can see, it now shows your request in draft status. On the right-hand side, you have a brief indication on how to move forward. Before submitting your pre-submission advice request, you can review the information you inserted by clicking on the pencil icons. Let's suppose, for instance, you wish to add another question. To do so, you just click and add your question. So, now everything is ready. You can click on Submit to send the request to EFSA. As you can see, the request has been correctly sent to EFSA. EFSA has 15 working days to accept your request for general pre-submission advice. Once the request has been accepted, you can see its status displayed as In Progress. Further down on the web page, in the Approver Comments tab, you can see the information EFSA wishes to share with you once the request is approved. In the Rejection Comments and Close Reasons fields, you can read the comments and reasons given by EFSA if the request for pre-submission advice is rejected. This may be the case when questions do not fall into the scope of general pre-submission advice as defined in Article 32A of the General Food Law. When EFSA replies to your questions, you will see in the Written Advice field the answers to your questions. In addition, EFSA will share with you a succinct summary, which will be published on the portal OpenEFSA once the application is declared valid. You can see that the status of your general pre-submission advice request is now displayed as closed.
So thank you. That's all for the general pre-submission advice. I'll be back for the renewal pre-submission advice, while now I'll give the floor back to Stefano to understand what happens for applications for renewal. Thank you, Stefano.
Thank you very much, Remigio. And we are now looking to the last process of this webinar, the submission of the list of intended studies for renewal from a potential applicant, that is, in this case, represented by Sara. Okay. So the Article 32C1 of Transparency Regulation describes already well the process to implement. The applicant intending to perform a renewal has to submit one list of studies they intend to perform with their study design. This list will undergo a public consultation launched by EFSA, and based on the comments received, the authority shall provide an advice. So the legislation is already very clear about the process. We just highlight the fact that Sara will need to get the pre-application ID as a first step, and then she will have to submit the list of intended studies with their study design. There will be the public consultation and the EFSA advice, non-binding advice. And after the process is completed, the potential applicant will need to notify the studies according to Article 32B. Let's have a look to the data fields that we have foreseen to describe the intended studies for renewal. The legislation is not as prescriptive as for the notification of studies in this list. It just clarifies the need of specifying the design of the studies. In order to facilitate the reuse of information and to, let's say, align as much as possible with the notification of studies, we have reused most of the data fields you already saw for the notification of studies. So we have the study title with eventually an English translation if the title is not English, the formal application ID, and the study scope that is again divided into some fields like the study intended area, the study type, the study objective, that is a free text field that where you can report the narrative describing the objective of the studies, and then the test item and the related component if applicable. Last but most important, the design of the study that can be described as a study guideline that is a pick list where you can select the most frequently used guideline to perform studies. And in case your study is not performed according to this guidance, the guideline, you can select, you can specify the narrative of the guideline in the study design description. It is also recommended, as from the practical arrangement, to specify the detailed protocol. I want just to clarify that you can, by just providing the study guideline, the section is already, let's say, completed. How does this work in practice? Well, Sara can create a new list of intended studies or retrieve an existing one. Sarah doesn't need to complete all the tasks in one go, but she can do it in multiple steps. So she can start to add the intended studies to this list until the list is completed. She can stop the work and restart maybe after 1 day or 2 until the list is completed. When she's finished, she can submit the list. And then the process of the renewal pre-submission advice will start. And I pass the word now to Remigio for the last part of this presentation.
Thank you, Stefano. So, upon reception of the list of intended studies for renewal, at EFSA there will be a light administrative check to verify that all the mandatory fields are well filled in. For example, the study design is correctly provided before going to the public consultation. Then the public consultation is launched and is opened for 3 calendar weeks. At the closure of the public consultations, all the comments are published by EFSA, while how they've been considered, this will be part of the summary of the renewal pre-submission advice. In case of plant protection products, again, the potential applicant needs to select the designated rapporteur member state when submitting the list of intended studies. The information notified by the potential applicant and the comments received during the public consultation will be shared with the competent authority. Then the comments which are relevant for the risk assessment should be taken into account when providing the renewal pre-submission advice. Renewal pre-submission advice has a broader scope than the general pre-submission advice, and it's both on the content of the application and on the design of the studies. This means that the renewal pre-submission advice should be specific and it's systematically given by EFSA, but no questions can be submitted. From now on, the workflow is pretty similar to the one we have already seen for the general pre-submission advice. Also, in this case, the first aim is to provide the advice in written form. The main difference is that the timeline is 30 working days as of the closure of the public consultation. Also, in this case, there will be a summary, which is going to be published once the related application is declared as valid or admissible. The summary will also include which comments and how they were taken into account to provide the renewal pre-submission advice. Similarly to what I mentioned before, for plant protection products, we have set a strong collaboration with the rapporteur member state. In this case, the participation of the RMS and the co-RMS is even established in the Commission Regulation 2020-1740. I also take the occasion to reassure member states authorities here connected today, because we are going to schedule dedicated trainings to explain how to use Connect EFSA and how to interact when providing pre-submission advice. I also would like to stress the process just described on the list of intended studies and the provision of the renewal pre-submission advice in accordance with Article 32C1 of the General Food Law is applicable only in cases when the application for renewal is supported with new studies. After receiving renewal pre-submission advice, Sarah needs now to go back to the notification of study database and look for the list of intended studies she has already submitted. She can check the information, she can complete the information she has drafted, and she has the obligation to notify the study in accordance with Article 32B. When she notifies the study, then John in his lab will receive the alert and co-notifies the study, closing the process previously described by Sorina. Please note that Sarah is not obliged to notify exactly all the studies she had previously inserted in the list of studies. Also in this case, the renewal pre-submission advice is neither committal nor binding for EFSA nor the potential applicant. Again, similarly to what I already mentioned before, EFSA will put in place the segregation of tasks when we receive the application, even if it is not foreseen by law. And then EFSA will publish the summary of the renewal pre-submission advice only when the related application is declared as valid or admissible. This last slide highlights to you the take-home messages and the main differences between the general and the renewal pre-submission advice. The general pre-submission advice is upon request, while the renewal one is systematic and proactively given by EFSA. The general pre-submission advice focuses on the rules and the content and cannot target any proposed study design. On the contrary, the renewal pre-submission advice is both on the content and on the application and on the study design submitted. Therefore, it's specific and targeted, while conversely, the general pre-submission advice needs to remain general. Lastly, the general pre-submission advice targets small and medium-sized enterprises, and both of them are non-committal neither for EFSA nor the applicant. It's now time to watch the last video, which will show you how to submit the list of intended studies on the Connect EFSA portal. The part related to the reception of the renewal pre-submission advice is not shown because it's very similar to the general pre-submission advice one.
In this video, we will show you the functionalities related to the submission of the list of intended studies for renewal according to Article 32C(1) of Transparency Regulation. Only the business operators in the role of a potential applicant can perform this operation, therefore you need to log in as business operator. You go to the section Applications, then to the section Renewals. The process is very similar to the notification of studies according to Article 32B, but with some difference that we will explain while we proceed with the demo. The first step is to obtain a pre-application ID for renewal. One of the main differences between the pre-application ID for renewal and the pre-application ID for study notifications is that the database will allow the creation of a list of intended studies for renewal to be submitted for public consultation. Let's see how you can create a pre-application ID for renewal first. You need to fill in the request name, a search string you can use to retrieve the pre-application ID at later stage. In this case, we proceed with the renewal of active substance AS2. You need to fill in also the former application ID. This is the ID of the application you would like to renew. Then you choose the subject of the application, in this case the active substance, called AS2. The subject of application is a free text field. You need to specify the food area by selecting the food domain. In case of pesticides, the authorization type and the application type are not applicable. Finally, it is possible to include a free text note, which can be useful to include, for example, the internal application ID, or other internal business operator information. By clicking on Confirm, you create a pre-application ID. After creating the pre-application ID, you can see the descriptive part of the pre-application ID for renewal, and on the right, you can find the list of intended studies for renewal. From the status bar on the top side of the screen, you can see the status of the list of intended studies for renewal of this specific pre-application ID. This status bar shows all the steps of the process. When the potential applicant receives a written renewal of the pre-submission advice, it will be visible on the right side of the screen. The potential applicant will be alerted if written advice is provided, and will also receive EFSA's advice through this tool. For active substances, the practical arrangements of EFSA recommend for applicants to form consortia. This can be done by using the Share With function, where the business operator, acting as a main contact, can select multiple applicants and involve them in the same renewal application. It is recommended to specify the component. In the case of an active substance application, the component corresponds with the subject of the pre-application ID for renewal. The component can be selected from a reference list of substances, but in this case AS2 is not in the list, so you need to add a new substance. Now you can fill in the form of 2 intended studies for renewal, 1 toxicology study and 1 efficacy study. Once the intended study form opens, you can see that it's the same form that you used to notify studies according to Article 32b, but the mandatory fields are different. For example, the starting date, the planned completion date and the laboratory are not marked as mandatory fields. However, the intended studies should include information on the study design, which can be specified by providing the study guideline or the study design description. The provision of the study protocol is also recommended. In case of a pesticide, you need to specify also the reporter member states. Now that you have completed the forms of the 2 intended studies, you can go back to the pre-application ID for renewal. At this point, you can submit the list of intended studies for renewal. You can see that the status bar has changed, and now it shows Submitted. After you have submitted the list of intended study for renewal, the pre-application ID and the respective intended studies are blocked from editing. You will be able to modify them after you receive EFSA's advice. During the administrative check, EFSA may request some clarification or correction on the submitted list of intended studies for renewal. In this case, the pre-application ID for renewal and the related intended studies will become editable again. Once the consultation is closed, the potential applicant will receive an alert and EFSA's advice through the same tool, if a written advice is provided. Once the consultation is closed, the potential applicant have the possibility to add additional business operators that declared interest in joining this consortium for the renewal of this active substance. At this stage it is possible to start a notification according to Article 32b. This operation can be done based on the intended studies entered into the system as part of the list of intended studies for renewal. So, there is no need to retype all the information. In this case you need to insert the starting date, the planned completion date, the international standard certification, and the laboratory details. In case the study will be submitted to an internal testing facility, you need to tick the box here, without entering the laboratory information. However, in this case, we will pick the laboratory from the list of registered laboratories in the system. After specifying the laboratory, you have all the information to notify the studies. The study has been notified as presented in the status bar. Though it is convenient to reuse the intended studies, in any case, business operators are free to modify the intended studies before notifying them according to Article 32b, and they can also add more notifications to follow up on the public consultation and EFSA's non-binding advice. With the submission of the studies according to Article 32b, this demo is completed. I hope you enjoyed this video and thanks for your interest.
We are almost at the end of this webinar, and we do take the occasion to thank all the colleagues involved in the preparation of the notification of study database and the definition of the procedures for the pre-submission advice, and of course the technical group on the notification of studies. It's really a big effort to implement all these aspects of the transparency regulation on time by the 27th of March. And thanks very much also to all of you for listening to the presentation of today. We reached the record number of 800 people connected. So, of course, we don't have time now to reply to all your questions, but we will do so, and we will collect specific use cases that will be showed to you the 16th of March, when we will have the second webinar on notification of studies and pre-submission advice. The recording of the webinar and all the videos will soon be available on the EFSA's website. So you can rewatch the webinar, you can rewatch the videos. In particular, please start the registration of your company as applicant, as already mentioned by Sorina at the beginning, as this will smooth our onboarding and to be ready for the 27th of March. Please also take a few minutes to fill in all the evaluation form that you are going to receive in your inbox. So let's move ahead now with the questions that we can address in these 10 minutes. And I start giving the floor back to Stefano, please.
Thank you very much, Remigio. I will try to go through the question. I try to anticipate some question by replying in writing. I reassure that we will answer the question afterwards to the individual participant. I would like to go a little bit on some of the question on the pre-application ID. It is, let's say, requested to take the pre-application ID every time you have studies to be notified, or when you need to, let's say, submit the list of intended studies for renewal. So this is it's a mandatory step. It's clarified in the practical arrangements. I leave the, let's say, then later on to Sorina to answer basically the questions on the user registration. There was a question related to the validation of the application. That is not, let's say, specific for this webinar. The EFSA will perform a validation of the application by, let's say, verifying that the studies submitted in the application are actually those were previously notified in the notification of study database, or a valid justification is provided. I would like just to highlight, since there were also many questions on this remark, that we are looking not to all the studies for this, let's say, requirement, but only for the studies commissioned or carried out after the 27th of March 2021. Okay, so there was several questions related to this matter, and I thought it was relevant to clarify this point. There was another one on security. We saw that basically the it's possible to report multiple business operator for a pre-application ID or for notification of studies. All the business operator that you include in this list will be able to see the information that you have reported in the study notification or in the pre-application ID. I think that it will be important to, there were a lot of questions on the this aspect of security. Maybe we are taking, we are following up this element in the next webinar on the 16th of March. I think it would be important. Yes, there were some questions on the sharing of the business operator. Regarding the laboratory in UK, basically there is an obligation for laboratory of Northern Ireland to notify studies, while basically this is not applicable for the laboratories in Great Britain at the current stage of agreement existing. Then there was a question related to if we reuse basically the information in the pre-application ID for the study notification. Yes. So basically the information, like for example the subject of application, the former application ID, and the fields, let's say, forming the study intended areas are automatically copied in the study. So it also simplifies the life to the notifiers. It is important to remind that you can change this information. Okay, for example, the test item can be different for the specific study in respect to the subject of application. Okay, I think I take even too much time for, let's say, the aspect I covered. I pass maybe the floor to Sorina for the registration, and then maybe we can leave a few minutes more to Remigio. Sorina, would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Stefano. I had a look at other questions. I noticed that there are some questions about the publication of this session, this webinar. As Stefano said before, it will be published on EFSA website, both the registration of the webinars and as far as I know, also the presentations. There will not be sent personally to the participants. Let me have a quick look at the questions. We have a question about modifying, changing at the end of the experiments, the start date and then the end dates. There is no limit in time for the modification that can be performed for a notification of studies, but we warmly recommend not to change these dates after the end of the experiment. In any case, all the changes will be tracked in the history and can be verified at submission moment. For renewal application, does laboratory need to notify the studies or only the business operator? After receiving the EFSA renewal advice, there will be the process of notification according to Article 32B. So the obligation to notify, co-notify is valid for both business operators and laboratories. I think, Stefano, you have already answered to the question of registering laboratories in UK. I answered a few questions in the chat. We are still improving our solution. For the moment, it's not available a mass import of the list of intended studies, but we have taken into consideration also this possibility. No, there is no fee charge for the pre-submission and consultation. There is a question on the possibility to be requested a fee or a charge.
Yes, thank you, Sorina. No, indeed, there's no fee.
Yes, there was a question. I think it's important to clarify related to, I mean, the notification of studies from laboratory. We have presented two different processes. That is basically the notification of studies according to Article 32B and the submission of the list of intended studies for renewal according to Article 32C1. Okay, laboratories are not involved in the, let's say, the submission of the list of intended studies for renewal. Okay, but they will become part of the notification of studies when the study is commissioned to them. Okay, so we have seen the process Article 32C1 is completed, so EFSA advice is provided back to the potential applicant. At this stage, the obligation are not finished for the potential applicant. They will need to commission actually the study, and with this commissioning of the study, they will need to notify the study according to Article 32B. And in this regard, also the laboratory will need to either notify the study or co-notify. I don't know if I was live because I saw just now the sign. So did you?
Yes, Stefano, I heard you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I was going through the list of many questions.
In the meantime, I can answer to Fabian that the portal will be available for all countries. If Switzerland is not in the list, we will check with our colleagues, our technical colleagues.
Okay, there was a very interesting remark. I think it is very important to highlight it. It is related to the bulk import. So for the moment, we are not foreseeing any functionality of bulk import of information like list of intended studies or study notification. The development of the system is not finishing with, let's say, March. We are also planning further activity, and surely we are going to extend the system to cover more, let's say, computer-to-computer interaction like bulk import or API to upload the data from the potential applicant system. But for the first release of the system, this will not be available yet. Okay, I think that as we said, I will take the opportunity to close the meeting if my colleague didn't see other question to be replied immediately. I would like just to reassure that in any case, all the question will be, let's say, considered, and we will try to answer you after the webinar. In case you have additional question, you can use basically the service desk email of EFSA that was already provided in the registration to you. I would like just to thank you all for having participated to this webinar. A lot of interest, and I thank you all, and we will take into account your feedback also for the preparation of next webinar on the 16th of March, and I hope that you will also participate to that one. Thank you very much again, and have a nice day.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.